Welcome back to the only podcast with access to the autobiographical journals of Phineas T. Swagibrad. Many people have asked us where we got the journals of Phineas T. Swagibrad from, and to be honest, we have absolutely no idea. They were just there on the shelf one day, and upon reading them we felt compelled to share them with the world. How else would you know about the adventures of Phineas T. Swagibrad? I have been absolutely dismayed to discover that Galdivian tanning is a long process, and that Galdivian double tanning is an even longer process. This meant that I had at least a day while the tanning took place to explore the town. Leather Hollow is quite a quaint town, and almost everyone that I've met here was either a tanner or leather worker. The few who weren't in one of those two categories, or the both of them, were traveling traders or hunters, bringing in fresh pelts and trading supplies for leather goods at reasonable prices. The highest buildings in the town were the tall roofs of the tanneries, broken up by gaps where various homes, shops, and leather workers were. In the center of town was a large building, which had a sign on it proclaiming that they were the best tanners in the kingdom. There was unfortunately nobody around to fact-check that sign and confirm its validity or not. But considering that it still was up and had yet to be burned down by any competing leather workers, it clearly had some merit to its claim. It was far from quiet in the square of this town, people rushing about in all directions, wearing some of the most curious hats. Asking one of the passerbys on the street about this unique behavior, he explained that it was time for the Great Listening. Confused, I asked him more about this Great Listening, but he seemed too busy to listen to my questions and ran off immediately. Great listening, my foot. He had displayed without a doubt some of the worst listening I've ever seen. Collectively, the tanners of this town made a great hustle and bustle as they set up around the streets. I saw as they set up stands, boxes, tables, whatever they could get their hands on all throughout the street, climbing up on top of them. It was impressive to see an entire town mobilized in such a dedicated effort, even if that effort was an entirely wasted effort. Personally, I was of the opinion that time would be far better spent if they were working on my tanning, but since they seemed insistent on wasting their time with these frivolous activities, I figured I should do my best to understand this strange culture. I found a local citizen who seemed to be less busy, having finished his setup for the Great Listening, and thus he was willing to talk to me. When I asked him what they were doing, he explained that they were preparing to listen to the mountains. I had never heard of any mountain speaking, or much less whispering. In fact, I had never heard of mountains making any noise at all, but he seemed adamant that this was a regular, normal part of a mountain's behavior, and that it would be quite surprising if the mountains didn't whisper this year, or if they didn't whisper in any year. I asked him what the mountains sounded like when they whispered, and he said, Suddenly he stopped what he was doing and turned his ears towards the sky. At that exact moment I realized that everyone around him in the streets was doing the same thing. He stood upon his stool and, tilting his head towards the cloud, had a thoughtful look on his face as he listened intently. I also listened, and I heard something amazing. I heard the sound of fish grilling on the barbecue. I love grilled fish. Nothing can compete with the crisp taste of a delectable fish, expertly grilled to the precise point of being properly cooked, maintaining all of its moisture while unlocking its maximum internal flavor. So many possible combinations: citrus, fresh herbs, garlic, ginger, spice, every one of them equally delicious. I realized, while thinking about the wonderful fish that would soon be in my future, that everyone around me had started screaming and running around panicking as though their toes had been cut off. Some were yelling, saying they needed to leave town. Others said they should instead prepare and build fortifications, while some just ran around screaming without having any words to say at all, totally out of place in the otherwise quite intellectual debates that were occurring at a very high volume between these clearly frightened tanners. I went over to where I'd seen the fish being cooked and purchased a few to enjoy myself, with one or two purchased to enjoy later, of course. I asked the fish salesman what the cause of this panic and pandemonium was. He explained that the Whispers of the Mountains had declared that there would be an attack on this village soon, and that it would certainly be strong enough to overpower their current forces. Fortunately, it sounded like this force was far enough away that I would not have to be here, since I would already be in my hot air balloon by the time that this force would get here. I could understand why this was causing a panic for those that were still here, though, considering the complete devastation that was purportedly predicted by the mountains. Quite fortunately, as a result of this event, I was able to stay at a local inn without being charged at all. This must be my lucky day. I have terrible news. As a result of the great listening and the news that came from the mountains, nobody is working on my Galdivian tanning project. What at first was only going to take a couple days, now could take weeks, perhaps even months. If it takes long enough, I too will be forced to face this terrible force from the tails of the mountains. I've tried offering some of the tanners here a considerable fortune in the form of ancient artifacts and gold pieces of irreplaceable art to continue working on my project, but unfortunately, they all seem to have no sense of the value of these priceless objects. They appear to have the peculiar attribute of valuing their lives more than, obviously, the most valuable objects that have been gathered on this continent. The head tanner offered to refund my project, but I didn't need the money. I needed to be able to get back in the air. The refund would be no possible solution for me, and I made that quite clear in my response. I implored him to expedite the tanning process and to put all his best men on the project, but he informed me that he was already doing that, and they simply had lost too many people in the response to the call from the mountains. It seemed like I would have to take matters into my own hands. Fortunately, those in the town of Leather Hollow were playing host to the greatest adventurer of all time. Yours truly, Phineas T. Swagibrad. And if anyone could save them from this terrible fate, it would surely be me. The first thing I would need would be a plan, or literally any idea of what this threat potentially was, or even how reliable the mountains were. I never had any personal relationships with any mountains in my past, and I couldn't say for certain whether the mountains had a reliable character or not. Something I think it's far past time the tanners considered is whether or not the mountains are the kind of mountains to lie or not. I think we should all consider that whenever we choose to listen to the words of mountains. Unfortunately, despite my quite logical explanations of the potential risks of listening to untrustworthy mountains, the town seemed to be wholly unconvinced by my reasonings. I therefore was forced to consider a way to guarantee the safety of all in this rather large town, a significant task by any reckoning. As I considered the options, I realized that there were two possible paths. One was to create better defenses for the town, and the other would be to create some form of attack so strong that they'd be able to eliminate any possible threat. I've always believed that the best defense is a good offense, so naturally I made it a goal to offend everyone that I came across. I caused an amazing amount of offense, but I realized it simply wouldn't be enough. I didn't have enough time to offend each person myself. I needed some way to offend the entire town at once, and it would have to be big in order to truly meet that criteria. In a sudden stroke of brilliance that stunned even me, it hit me. By it, I of course mean an acorn that fell out of a tree and landed upon my head, but that gave me an idea. Everybody would be able to look up and see a giant insulting message written in letters so large the whole town would see it, no matter where they looked up from, and therefore would be offended by the insulting nature of this message. I began my mission to write in the sky my carefully crafted insult, sure to devastate the townspeople. You all are dumb. I had just about finished the first letter, the Y in you, when I ran out of wood, making the rest of this project basically impossible, as I didn't have time to find more wood for the project, forcing me to improvise. I started by stealing a hide tanned by one of their special tanning methods, which has a secret technique that only they know, making it quite fireproof. I planned to flaunt this flagrant disrespect of their property by displaying it on top of my gigantic Y, but I felt that it wasn't quite enough on its own. In another flash of brilliance, I wrote my insulting message on the hide as I tied it to the two sides of the Y, stringing the cloth across the middle. I stepped back with pride, and was shocked to see almost no significant response from the town. The goal of a giant letter on a hill asking them why didn't seem to faze them, and they appeared to be impervious to the power of my masterful insult written upon the pelt. I then made an eye-opening discovery. From the ground, the writing had the unfortunate attribute of being incredibly difficult to read, an undesirable trait for attempting to insult people via writing. I would need to do more to achieve my desired effect. Another bolt of inspiration, now adding to the gathering storm of ideas pooling in my head, I decided to take something else from them, something to disrespect their very way of life. What could be more dear to them than the fires that are part of their tannery drying process? Using special gloves inside of their facility, I grabbed a small burning log and climbed my monument once more to display my victory at the top for all to see. Unfortunately, in placing the log within the fireproof tanned hide, I lost my footing and slipped, pulling back on the tanned hide and releasing it barely above the ground once I had landed softly on the forest floor, since the slewing effect of the hide had slowed me down to such a point it gently placed me upon the ground. Once I had released it, the hide shot back up into the air and launched the burning log into the woods, which soon caught several trees on fire. The ensuing blaze was large enough to cause several townspeople to rush out to put out the fire, and I looked up in awe at the ultimate insult I had created. Confident that this was the best possible offense, I knew that the townspeople would be safe. No greater offense could possibly happen, leaving them with no better defense. With the utmost urgency, I located the master tanner and implored him to continue my project in light of what I'd done for the town. After taking a moment to appraise my fine workmanship and creativity, he agreed, and before I knew it, the town seemed back to normal. With any luck, I'll be back in the air in a few days.